NASA's mission is to explore the unknown.
There's more that we don't know than we do know. That's just the nature of the universe.
In the search for answers, it launches its scientists into space, its craft beyond the limits of the solar system.
Taking risks is part of making discoveries.
Space exploration is like lighting a match, and we don't know what lurks in the shadows.
Hey, what is that?
There could be anything out there.
A mysterious force smashes a spacecraft from the Apollo program into the moon.
You'd think we'd understand it, we'd know everything about it, but we don't.
A photograph taken on the lunar surface reveals something that should not be there.
If they're really on the moon, why do we see objects reflected in their visors? It's supposed to be empty up there.
And forgotten images reveal the truth about the most iconic picture in the history of space exploration.
It's impossible to look at that particular image without seeing a human face.
NASA's missions have uncovered disturbing anomalies.
Okay, we're seeing 3 or 4 objects.
There are 3 objects
that continue to perplex our finest scientific minds. These are NASA's Unexplained Files. When an Apollo spacecraft crashes into the lunar surface,
a lot of very clever people did the math on that one. It should not have happened.
The NASA investigation begins immediately.
You'd think we'd understand it, we'd know everything about it, but we don't.
And the answers are stranger than fiction.
Were we trespassing on somebody else's territory?
August 4th, 1971. 75 miles above the lunar surface. Apollo 15's command module pilot, Alfred Worden, prepares the spacecraft for the perilous 3-day journey back to Earth.
You always worry about something going wrong. You cannot do a program as far-reaching and as challenging as going to the moon without expecting something to go wrong.
Before Worden heads home, he has one final mission objective: to release a 3-foot-long microsatellite that will continue studying the moon long after the astronauts have left.
We had that programmed in our flight plan exactly down to the second when we were supposed to do that. All I had to do was push a button. I had the simple part of the job. You watch it go and you call Houston Control and you say, it's gone, it's on its way.
Tracking stations have acquired the satellite.
And then we watched it spin out of sight.
The satellite drifts off, orbiting the moon every 2 hours for the next 16 months, gathering data about the moon's magnetic and gravitational fields. The experiment is so successful that on the next mission, Apollo 16 astronauts launch an identical satellite. But just a few days later, something strange happens.
The satellite starts doing something that's really unexpected. It's veering off course, behaving almost unpredictably.
There must be some force that had caused the spacecraft's orbit to become unstable.
The satellite's orbit keeps changing. Within 3 weeks, it goes from floating 80 miles above the moon to skimming just 6 miles above the surface.
As NASA was watching the progress of the mission, they were, of course, alarmed that it was getting so close to the moon.
Just 35 days after launch, NASA loses contact with its spacecraft. Analysis of the flight data confirms the space agency's fears. The probe crashed into the moon.
They had a prediction that it would last for 2 years. It only lasted 35 days. Why?
NASA spacecraft don't just crash for no reason.
The satellite crash puts NASA in a difficult position and provokes wild speculation.
Was there a group, whoever that group might be, that didn't want us going to the moon? Were we trespassing on somebody else's territory?
As strange as the idea sounds, this is not the Apollo program's first uncanny experience near the lunar surface. Early incidents prompted NASA scientists to put procedures in place to deal with unexplained sightings.
NASA has a code for something like these. They call them moon pigeons.
This is part of the imagery that led NASA to commission a study of what they call moon pigeons, things seen out the window.
NASA does not believe that some unknown presence on the moon is responsible, but the space agency's explanation for the crash is no less extraordinary. There may be something going on inside the moon that scientists don't fully understand.
Gravity on the moon is variable. It's not a constant gravity around the moon.
The moon is lumpy, not just because of the hills and valleys, but because there's areas underneath that actually have a little bit more gravity than other areas.
Unusually dense moon rock causes these zones of extra strong gravity. Scientists call the zones mascons.
A mascon is kind of an invisible force that changes the basic gravity of the moon, but it changes it in local area, not the whole gravity.
NASA calculates the satellite's trajectory to within a fraction of a degree, but difficult variables like multiple mascons could add up to catastrophic consequences.
These mascons cause the satellite to crash because they give it a little tug. So what they do is they actually change the position of where the satellite gets closest to the moon. And if they keep doing it long enough, just in small increments, eventually it will crash.
The crash of the Apollo subsatellite was an accident caused by forces outside of NASA's control. And it was not the last craft to meet a violent end. Up next, NASA goes nuclear on the largest planet in the solar system.
It was very surprising. Nobody expected it.
We effectively exploded a nuclear device in Jupiter's atmosphere.
When a dark spot appears on the surface of Jupiter,
it was not just any old dark spot. This thing was huge.
Conspiracy theorists blame a controversial NASA mission.
We effectively exploded a nuclear device in Jupiter's atmosphere.
From the Apollo program to today's deep space probes, NASA's spacecraft represent the pinnacle of human engineering. But space travel still provides challenges for even the most brilliant designs. October 2003. An amateur astronomer is taking photographs of the largest planet in our solar system when he sees something strange.
A dark spot appeared on Jupiter back in 2003, which was very strange, very surprising. Nobody expected it.
Scientists initially suggest that, like Jupiter's famous red spot, the dark dot could be a storm in Jupiter's violent atmosphere.
The big red spot of Jupiter is actually a storm that's raged now for at least 300 years. But they come and they go. So it wouldn't be too surprising if a new spot suddenly appeared on this giant planet.
While a storm could generate a spot on Jupiter's surface, for it to be visible through telescopes, it would have to be larger than any weather system ever seen on Earth.
Jupiter's atmosphere is massive. For something to create a black spot that big would require a huge amount of energy to be released.
An alternative idea for the spot is that it could be the site of an asteroid or comet impact. Jupiter's colossal size and powerful gravitational pull make it a prime target for anything flying through the solar system.
Jupiter is this giant planet that pretty much vacuums up stuff as it goes along.
It's quite possible that a foreign body, such as a comet, could impact Jupiter and cause massive explosion scars. In fact, it's happened. Comet Shoemaker-Levy impacted Jupiter, and you saw a beautiful string of dark black spots.
But even on Jupiter, a big impact is a once-in-a-decade event. And records reveal that none was predicted around the time of the spot's appearance.
If these black spots aren't caused by something natural, or if they're not caused by an alien civilization, what's left? Could it be us?
Human beings creating spots on the surface of a planet 500 million miles away sounds impossible. But just a month before the dark spot is photographed, NASA's Galileo probe is floating toward Jupiter as it nears the end of its life. And there is a major problem with disposing of the dying spacecraft. It carries a fully functioning nuclear reactor.
We have to send nuclear devices on spacecraft. That's the only way to power them as they get into deep space. And so you have to choose between, do we just leave this nuclear reactor floating around in space, or do we dispose of it in some way?
Scientists fear that Galileo's nuclear-powered generator could wreak havoc on one of the most promising places in the solar system for hosting extraterrestrial life.
There was a danger that the Galileo spacecraft might actually impact Europa, which is what we didn't want to have happen, particularly now that we think there could be life under the ice in this big ocean.
We don't want to impact this spacecraft into a life-bearing object.
At the time the Galileo mission was planned, there was little evidence to suggest there could be living creatures beneath the ice of Europa, so scientists didn't worry about probe disposal. But the fear of contaminating a life-bearing world forces them to create a final plan to incinerate the spacecraft and its plutonium reactor.
We knew we had to do something with this spacecraft. We just couldn't let it float around in space. So we decided that we would actually put Galileo to its death by plunging it into Jupiter.
As NASA's decision goes public, a Dutch physicist, Jaco van der Voort, warns that sending nuclear material into Jupiter's volatile atmosphere could have catastrophic consequences.
Jaco van der Voort's theory is that the Galileo probe, which carries plutonium in its core, could actually be imploded by the pressure of the atmosphere and cause Jupiter to turn into a massive fireball.
Undeterred, NASA crashes Galileo into Jupiter.
We effectively exploded a nuclear device in Jupiter's atmosphere.
There was some effort to actually look at the spacecraft as it went into the planet, It's pretty amazing, and it all vaporized within a few hours of hitting that surface. This one object from mankind is now just part of the ephemeral gases of the planet.
Despite the remarkable timing of its appearance, the evidence seems to indicate the Galileo explosion did not create the 2003 dark spot. Scientists are now working on a theory that the appearance of at least some of the dark spots on Jupiter could be caused by atmospheric phenomena.
It's speculated that we may be seeing the effect of hydrocarbons created by aurora. It's like the aurora borealis on the Earth, but many thousands of times more powerful. But it's still a mystery.
In a strange twist of fate, Galileo's greatest discovery, that one of Jupiter's moons could hold life, condemned the probe to destruction. But some mysteries that defy explanation are much closer than the Jupiter system. Up next, on the lunar surface, the Apollo 12 astronauts catch something impossible on camera.
If they're really on the moon, why do we see objects reflected in their visors? It's supposed to be empty up there.
A photograph from the Apollo 12 mission reveals something that should not be there.
If they're really on the moon, why do we see objects reflected in their visors? It's supposed to be empty up there.
This particular picture shows something that does not appear in any other official photograph.
Could a single image cast doubt on humankind's greatest achievement?
I can't believe it. Amazing.
Some people believe that the moon landings never happened.
In the Apollo 12 lunar module, astronauts Pete Conrad and Alan Bean make their final approach above a region of the moon known as the Ocean of Storms.
I got something on the horizon out there. I got some craters too, but I don't know where I am yet.
I thought, where are we going to land? There's no room to land. And then we waited for these probes to illuminate, which were about 5 feet below the landing pad. I said, contact light.
Contact light. Roger, copy contact.
And then Pete touched down.
And the fiber landed 20 feet.
For Conrad and Bean, the experience of stepping onto another world is overwhelming.
I let go of the ladder and started to wobble a bit and steadied myself. And I thought, wow, this is the moon. We're really here. This is amazing. This is science fiction, except you're living it.
The astronauts spend much of the mission documenting their activities with photographs.
We'd spent a lot of time being trained to take photographs on the moon. They didn't have automatic focus then. They didn't have automatic exposure. You had to set them manually. And you didn't screw up one single frame because we'd had this good training.
In spite of challenging photographic conditions and a totally alien environment, Bean and Conrad capture images of incredible quality. But for some, the pictures seem too good to be true.
The photographs are amazing, and it's very hard to believe that such quality could be obtained using relatively primitive equipment under very harsh conditions.
One photograph of Bean draws unwelcome attention for NASA. The anomaly is small, but clearly visible.
You can clearly see Conrad in Bean's faceplate here. But there's something else as well. Definitely doesn't belong there.
The single frame offers no explanation for the anomaly. But there's another record of what happened during the mission.
And a fiber landed 20 feet.
Apollo 12 was also equipped with a color television camera.
My job when I got out was to go over, get that color TV camera and move it out and point it back so that everybody could watch.
But just as he begins to film, Bean's footage cuts out, leaving no video record of the anomaly's source.
Conspiracy theorists say that there's something on the moon that NASA doesn't want the public to know about. And it was very convenient that the camera broke so that there's no subsequent video footage of the landing.
Bean explains the video failure as a simple mistake.
I'm sure they told me in training, do not point this thing at the sun. Do not do that. I didn't remember that. And I pointed at the sun and it burned out the tube.
This is a pretty advanced camera, but there's simple physics involved, and if you point it at the sun, you're going to fry the Vidicon tube and you're going to lose the picture.
Without a video record, we can only speculate on what caused the anomaly. One idea is that the rogue reflection in Bean's visor could be the command module, caught on camera as its orbit carried it past the landing site. But that explanation doesn't satisfy the Apollo astronauts.
Could not be the command module, because the command module is 60 miles away, and it's not going to show up that big.
Conspiracy theorists suggest the photograph provides evidence that NASA faked the moon missions.
Some people believe that the moon landings never happened and that they were actually filmed in some type of movie studio.
Pete Conrad takes a picture of Alan Bean with a reflection in his visor that conspiracy theorists point to as being an indication of studio lighting.
If they're really on the moon instead of on a soundstage, why do we see objects reflected in their visors? It's supposed to be empty up there.
An overhead lighting rig on a movie set could explain the anomaly's presence, but there are other theories about its origin.
I don't believe that. Back in the 60s and 70s, the technology didn't remotely exist to fake moon landings in a convincing way. I think that it's actually moon dust that has been placed on the helmet by the continual raising and lowering of the visor by the astronaut.
With no conclusive evidence, theories about the visor anomaly remain speculation. But the idea that NASA faked the moon landings doesn't sit well with the men who flew the missions.
My response to those who think it was all done on a sound stage, I think it's kind of an insult, because we have furthered knowledge. We've done some wonderful things, and as far as I'm concerned, it's all hot air.
The images from the Apollo program are not the only controversial NASA photographs. Still to come, investigators discover forgotten images that unmask the face on Mars.
This is one of the most astonishing images in space exploration history.
The first NASA probe to reach Mars beams back an iconic image.
This is one of the most astonishing images in space exploration history.
It looked like a face. You can see eye sockets, a nose, and a mouth structure.
But when Viking takes more images to verify the phenomenon, the data gets buried somewhere in the NASA archives.
It seems to me kind of impossible to lose pictures.
And the mystery of the face on Mars becomes a conspiracy theory.
It's easy to see why some people would become suspicious.
Ever since NASA first carried man into space, the agency has taken a purely scientific approach to the question of whether we are alone in the universe. Its scientists subject any potential evidence to careful scrutiny before releasing information to the public. But sometimes the public makes up its own mind. July 1976. NASA's Viking 1 lander makes history as the first human spacecraft to touch down on the Martian surface. 1,000 miles up, the Viking orbiter scans the surface to find landing sites for subsequent Mars missions. The images it beams back to scientists on Earth show the red planet in unprecedented detail. And one picture sends shockwaves around the world.
What came back was an astonishing array of valleys and mountains, but the most particularly interesting feature was a face that seemed to jump out of the photographs, looking out at Earth as if to say, we are here, we are here.
It looked like a face. You could see eye sockets, a nose, and a mouth structure.
It's impossible to look at that particular image without seeing a human face.
NASA originally releases the photo of the face to the public to capture interest in space exploration. It works. Perhaps because the discovery of a face on Mars had already been predicted. Almost 20 years before Viking took its iconic photograph, legendary artist Jack Kirby produced a comic book called The Face on Mars.
Jack Kirby's comic book speculated on a long-dead race that had erected a face on Mars, which is why when a face on Mars was discovered, it really raised further speculation that we're not alone in this universe.
If the face truly is a monument, it is so enormous, 18 football fields long, that it would be viewable only from the air or from space.
Speculation that the face on Mars was left behind by creatures that used to live on Mars is not that far-reaching. On Earth, we have things like Stonehenge and the pyramids. They're visible from the air.
The public interest in the face on Mars turns to frenzy, and Viking program chief scientist Gerald Soffen issues a statement dismissing the anomaly as a trick of the light.
Might have freaked them out a little bit. They might just nervous about what they might have found. And NASA goes, no, it's just an imaging glitch or this and that, let's just move on.
Some say the face on Mars is just a creation of the human imagination.
We're programmed as humans to recognize faces. We're really good at it. You know, evolutionarily, it's to our advantage to know who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. It's just very common, and we see faces all the time, everywhere.
The only way for scientists to ascertain the true nature of the anomaly is to obtain more data. 35 days later, the Viking orbiter makes a second pass over the Cydonia region of Mars and takes another picture of the same area. And despite shooting from a completely different angle, the face is still clearly visible.
If you look at this left-hand image, you can see the face with its shadow. But 35 days later, another photo of the same region was taken, and you see, again, the face, but with a slightly shorter shadow, meaning the sun was at a different angle. So the question is, are these naturally occurring, or are they artificial?
This second image seems to offer confirmation that the face on Mars is not just a trick of the light. Because if the shape was only formed by shadows, it would not be visible from a different angle in different light conditions. But for some reason, this image does not reach the public. It only emerges 4 years later when 2 image processing experts conduct their own search through old Mars mission data.
When a second image of the face is discovered later, among supposedly misfiled data, it all begins to smell a little funny.
It's tempting to speculate that there's some sort of conspiracy to keep the truth from the public.
NASA maintains that the images were available to the public, but the methods of archiving and preservation may have made them hard to access.
They all get stored on tapes. Multiple copies of tapes get made. They get archived in multiple locations. It seems, to me, kind of impossible to lose pictures.
For more than 20 years, conspiracy theorists accuse NASA of ignoring demands for further investigation of the face. But in 1998, a spokesman for the Mars Exploration Program makes a surprise announcement.
Jim Garvin, who was a senior scientist on the mission to explore Mars, said that the face on Mars was the #1 priority.
NASA's willingness to expend valuable resources on something they've already dismissed as unimportant arouses suspicion in some quarters.
What was the significance? Why was it going to such extraordinary lengths to look at this face? Perhaps NASA believed itself that this was an artificial construct of some sort.
Even though the resolution is 10 times sharper than in the 1970s, NASA's 1998 photograph doesn't provide an answer to the mystery that satisfies everyone.
Some people are suggesting that NASA doctored the image to hide the face on Mars.
It was taken during the Martian winter. There was some cloud cover that was obscuring a few of the details. And the light and the photo itself are from slightly different angles. So it wasn't a direct comparison to the previous photos.
In 2001, NASA makes a final attempt to solve the mystery. The Mars Global Surveyor probe takes another image from directly overhead.
NASA broke down to the public demand that finally just tasked the satellite to take an exact close-up image of that area.
NASA technicians merged the latest shot with the previous images to build a three-dimensional model.
Take those images of different perspective, put them into a computer. You can go from, this is a flat thing on a piece of paper seen in the 1970s. Now it's real.
NASA's 3D image provides conclusive proof that the face on Mars isn't a face at all.
In fact, it is a beautiful mountain, a geologic feature with eroding slopes.
Ultimately, the mystery of the face on Mars was the product of primitive imaging techniques from the early days of space exploration. Today, we have high-definition images beamed from robots on the surface of the red planet, and yet we still find mysteries there we cannot explain. Still to come, something is moving on the surface of the supposedly dead planet.
One moment it wasn't there yet, and then the next moment it's there. Who put it there?
When NASA's Opportunity rover photographs something extraordinary on the Martian surface.
So here you have on the ground a lump that somehow is shaped like a jelly donut.
The discovery creates worldwide confusion.
The jelly donut is indeed a bit of a mystery.
One moment it wasn't there yet, and then the next moment it's there.
Apart from our own planet, there is nowhere in the universe we know better than the surface of Mars. But this supposedly dead world can still surprise us. January 8th, 2014. The Opportunity rover has spent 10 years scouring the red planet for minerals. As it crosses the ridge on the edge of the 14-mile-wide Endeavour crater, it spots something confusing.
We took some color pictures of it, and that's where the jelly donut came from. Kind of round, about donut size, with this, reddish, purplish dimple in the middle.
The unidentified object looks like nothing else ever seen on Mars. But when scientists look at photographs of the same patch of ground from 12 days earlier, the oddity evolves into a mystery. At the exact same spot, there was no jelly donut.
The reason that it's interesting to see things move on Mars is because it hardly ever happens.
The jelly donut was certainly not there, and then it was there.
The most interesting thing that's happened in this place in the past 2 billion years, at least, is the rover driving past. That's the most activity that's happened there.
My first idea when I saw this was maybe a Martian just put it there as, hey, here we are.
When NASA does not offer a satisfactory explanation, speculation mounts. Is the donut organic life, a fungus or plant grown out of the Martian soil? One controversial science writer even files a lawsuit that pushes NASA to examine the object more closely. And several leading scientists agree that the strange object merits investigation.
I've been a fossil hunter for many, many years, and when I go out hunting fossils, I see thousands and thousands of rocks, but when I see one that looks interesting, I say, stop what you're doing, wait a minute, I've got to examine this in detail. I can't say that NASA didn't study this rock in detail, but if it were studied in detail, then that should have been the subject of a scientific paper.
I don't have any comment on any lawsuits, but I think it's only natural for the public to be curious about this. It really was something that is ambiguous.
NASA is initially unable to explain how the mysterious rock could have moved. Former NASA scientist Richard Hoover has his own theory.
It's probably part of a meteorite that came in and landed on the surface of Mars and broke into pieces. And that one of the pieces happened to land relatively close to the rover.
While Hoover's theory is plausible, there is no corroborating evidence available.
The rover doesn't have any kind of a seismograph. There's no way to, unless we visually saw a new crater appear, that's the only way we'd be able to detect it.
When NASA does make an official statement, it suggests the jelly donut is a rock dislodged from the rover's wheel.
The Opportunity rover did a kind of a pirouette. And we think that in the process of that wheel moving across the ground, that we kind of flicked this rock, it kind of tiddly-winked it out of the ground, and that it moved to the location there where we see it.
I can tell you that for having driven jeeps and rovers across deserts on the Earth, it actually didn't surprise me at all.
What we think happened is it crushed the rock. Some of the rock went into the wheel well. Like in your washer machine, kind of getting mixed around before it eventually came out.
But even if the wheel theory is correct, NASA scientists admit that the jelly donut still poses other questions.
Outside, and it's got kind of a weird deep red color, not a Martian kind of red. We're seeing a strange composition.
No one has ever published any scientific details of what was the chemical composition, what was the nature of the reddish interior.
These are the kinds of questions that the biologists want to know, to think about, was it a habitable environment?
If nothing else, the jelly donut proves that there is still much we do not understand about the red planet. But we do not need to travel to distant worlds to find mysteries. Some of the strangest events happen in NASA's own backyard.
3, 2, 1, 0.
Still to come, as NASA prepares to launch a revolutionary space probe. Something bizarre happens in the skies over Cape Canaveral.
Liftoff of the Atlas V with the Solar Dynamics Observatory.
As a NASA rocket blasts off, a series of freak weather events hits the launch site.
You don't normally see this sort of thing at a rocket launch.
And as the rocket gets higher, the skies above Cape Canaveral keep getting stranger.
It was quite unique and unexpected.
This is like a sci-fi movie, except it's real life. It's really happening.
Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, February 11, 2010. An Atlas V rocket waits for a break in the weather above Space Launch Complex 41. It carries a precious payload, NASA's $850 million Solar Dynamics Observatory. The satellite promises to beam back 50 times more data than any mission in NASA's history, unlocking the secrets of our nearest star.
It's a beautiful winter's morning. Light clouds in the sky. It's a gorgeous day for a rocket launch.
T-minus 15 seconds.
Romeo Dersher, the SDO's Education and Outreach Manager, films the launch.
This was the mission I had been working on from day one, so there was a lot of excitement on my part to be there and see our project finally lift off and take to the skies.
3, 2, 1, 0. And ignition and liftoff of the Atlas V.
For Dersher and his colleagues on the observatory program, this moment should be the culmination of years of work. But the crowd doesn't get the spectacle they were expecting to see.
I was looking through the viewfinder of my camera when I hear the crowd go, wow. Everybody was saying how incredible this was, and people who had seen 40, 50, 60 launches had never seen anything like that before.
People look up and see this portion of the sky where there's a spectrum of just gorgeous colors.
You see the yellow, you see some green and orange. It looks like a diamond in the sky.
The manifestation of the weird rainbow phenomenon right above an active rocket launch site is almost unheard of. Anything that poses a threat to the spacecraft could trigger an abort, even after launch. Mission Control ignores the phenomenon and the launch continues. But as the rocket goes supersonic, the skies around it become even stranger.
You can see concentric circles of the wave as it went out, one after the other, just like throwing a pebble in a pond.
The ripples looked at first very small, but they quickly became bigger and bigger. I'm thinking, something is not right here. We're looking at this, not quite knowing what we're witnessing.
Just as it seems as if the launch of the Solar Dynamics Observatory must be cursed, the watching crowds see yet another strange phenomenon in the sky. Dersher captures the moment on camera.
There was a kind of like a white beam of light that appeared to follow the rocket.
Whatever it is, it's traveling at incredible speed.
Normally light effects hang in the sky. They're not changing. This light follows the rocket upwards. It's something I've never seen in the sky before.
Faced with such a freak event coming off the back of an unprecedented series of phenomena, scientists search for an explanation. They theorize that the first phenomenon, a multicolored apparition above the launch site, could be related to the weather conditions on that day.
It looks like a patch of a rainbow, but in fact it's not a rainbow at all. It's known as a sundog.
It's essentially the same thing as a rainbow, except instead of water vapor or water droplets, it's ice crystals, and so you have these dancing colors in the sky.
Sundogs are perhaps the most spectacular manifestation of a group of atmospheric phenomena known to weather scientists as ice halos.
Halo phenomena can result when the sunlight passes through countless minuscule crystals of ice up in high clouds, which each act like tiny prisms that glint the sunlight towards you.
Footage from previous launches reveals the second phenomenon. The strange rippling effect in the sky has been seen before, but its interaction with the sundog is highly unusual.
What's actually happening is that the rocket is achieving max Q, the maximum dynamic pressure, the greatest resistance in the atmosphere as it's moving upwards.
Bam! They hit the sundog and it just disappeared.
And weather scientists believe that the final phenomenon, the beam of light that precedes the rocket, could also be a previously undiscovered optical effect.
As the rocket flies through the atmosphere, it's supersonic, and it has to tell the atmosphere ahead of it that it's coming. So it creates a shock front, and that shock front will then trail off behind the rocket, just like the wake of a boat.
The rapid appearance of a never-before-seen light effect, right after two other strange atmospheric phenomena, may not be a coincidence. Whatever the cause of this strange series of events was, it did not prevent the successful deployment of the Solar Dynamics Observatory. It continues to probe the mysteries of our nearest star. Decades after man first set foot on the moon, the Apollo missions continue to shock and astonish. As we build upon the lessons of the past, new discoveries bring with them fresh challenges. A new era of space exploration raises exciting questions. And the answers just might change everything. NASA's mission is to explore the unknown.
There's more that we don't know than we do know. That's just the nature of the universe.
In the search for answers, it launches its scientists into space, its craft beyond the limits of the solar system.
Taking risks is part of making discoveries.
Space exploration is like lighting a match, and we don't know what lurks in the shadows.
Hey, what is that?
There could be anything out there.
A Soviet probe uncovers evidence of something unsettling on the moon.
I really wonder if the Germans could have gotten to the moon. Actually, I think they could have.
The red planet comes alive.
There could be a wonder world for small living creatures underneath the Martian surface right now.
I don't think there's any good arguments that say there can't be.
And something in orbit appears to threaten the International Space Station.
An absolutely unexpected phenomenon.
We're going to see devastating effects all over the world.
NASA's missions have uncovered disturbing anomalies.
Okay, we're seeing 3 or 4 objects. There are 3 objects
that continue to perplex our finest scientific minds. These are NASA's Unexplained Files. A series of revolutionary Soviet lunar probes disappear as they approach unexplored territory.
Everything cuts out. Bam! Nothing.
When one of the probes finally returns to Earth, scientists uncover unsettling evidence that something else got to the moon first.
What could it have been?
I really wonder if the Germans could have gotten to the moon. Actually, I think they could have.
3:17 p.m., July 20th, 1969. When the Apollo 11 astronauts become the first people in history to set foot on another world.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Russia suffers a crushing defeat in the battle to conquer space.
When Armstrong and Aldrin landed on the moon, I think the Russians were devastated. I think that was a big blow to them.
But just 3 days before the American landing, the Russian attempt to upstage their American rivals appears to be going well. As the unmanned Soviet probe, codenamed Luna 15, arrives in lunar orbit.
While Luna 15 isn't a manned mission, it is a big step in lunar exploration and should put the Soviets back in a strong position.
Luna 15's flight plan calls for landing on a mysterious area of the moon known as the Sea of Crises. The probe's mission is to drill into the surface and beat the Apollo astronauts back to Earth with mankind's first samples of moon rock.
Everything seems to be going fine. But then 4 minutes into the descent, everything cuts out. Bam. Nothing.
5 years later, the Russians make another attempt to return to the same area with Luna 23. But the second craft also crashes and fails to bring back any rocks from the Sea of Crises. Despite the setbacks, the Russian Space Agency launches another probe, hoping that it can beat the odds and avoid whatever caused its predecessors to fail.
Luna 24 follows very soon after Luna 23. Lands just a couple of miles away. The Russians aren't giving up on this one.
Luna 24 succeeds where the previous Russian missions failed, returning to Earth with a precious sample from the unexplored region.
The sample of lunar soil brought back weighs less than 0.7 of a pound, but has a big impact on the Soviets' understanding of lunar geology.
The results of the analysis shock Soviet geologists.
It looked like something had happened to the soil in an area of the moon that was supposedly undisturbed for billions of years. What could it have been?
Tests on the sample confirm that the soil used to be buried deep underground. Someone or something brought it to the surface.
The Soviets know that the Americans haven't been to this part of the moon. They think this is their turf. So they have to face up to the question, who the heck's been disturbing the lunar surface here?
Could someone else have landed on the moon before the US and Russia?
I have heard that the Germans developed a moon rocket before they were defeated in 1945.
We know for a fact from NASA's own records, the Germans had a very advanced space exploration program.
The Nazis were leaders in the rocketry industry. And they had people like Wernher von Braun.
German aerospace engineer Wernher von Braun is the founding father of rocket science.
Wernher von Braun was a genius. May have been a Nazi, but he was a genius.
And was able to design systems that, to this day, are still astounding to us.
During World War II, the Nazi regime asked von Braun to develop the V-2 rocket, the first man-made craft to reach space. NASA and their Russian counterparts both know that this Nazi superweapon was a key step in the development of their own moon rockets.
We would not have been able to land on the moon if it hadn't been for the Germans. Damn right.
The first American rocket was based on V2 technology. The first Russian rocket was essentially just a V2. How difficult is it to believe that the Nazis pushed their technology just that little bit further?
I really wonder if the Germans could have gotten to the moon. Actually, I think they could have.
Nazi technology may have had the potential to reach the moon, but there is no evidence to suggest that a German spacecraft disturbed the dust of the Sea of Crises. In 2011, NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter sheds new light on the mystery of the Luna 24 probe.
Against all odds, Luna 24 landed in the vicinity of a crater.
The image from the LRO reveals that by pure chance, Luna 24's landing spot was at the edge of a crater from an asteroid impact that released rock from deep underground.
The Soviets were hoping this would be a perfect landing site, but nobody knows what the lunar geology is going to be until they actually land.
So the Luna 24 sample that seemed like freshly disturbed dirt was the result of geology rather than Nazi technology.
If the probe had returned a sample from anywhere else, the moon dirt would have tested normal.
The discovery of a crater solves the mystery of Luna 24's strange sample. But the fate of the other Soviet probes remains unexplained. Advanced Nazi rocket technology from the 1940s pales in comparison to NASA's current spacecraft. But as we enter a new era of exploration, new discoveries remind us that we are still in the early years of space technology. In a distant constellation, an ancient star is surrounded by mysterious rings.
Rings around stars that are as old as this star is are very rare.
For almost 2 decades, the rings defy all attempts at scientific explanation.
When we can't explain what we see with what we know, we have to start explaining with what we don't know.
And the only science capable of explaining this phenomenon is truly mind-blowing.
Any civilization capable of making a ring world around its star would be light years ahead of us.
Southern Spain, 1995. High in the Sierra Nevada mountains, astronomer Benjamin Zuckerman explores an unusual star about 190 light years from Earth in the distant Cetus constellation.
We weren't really sure what we might find. So, although it definitely was a wow moment to see 49 set, at the time we did not realize quite how unusual it was going to turn out to be.
The star is surrounded by 2 enormous rings.
One of the rings has a radius, I think, of about 1 billion miles. And the other one's 2 or 3 times that size farther out. And so these are rings that are occurring in places where you would expect planets to form.
For an astronomer, the obvious conclusion is that he's looking at rings of dust and gas, which often encircle young stars. But after years of observation, Zuckerman discovers that 49 Ceti is not young at all.
The star is about 40 or 50 million years old, which makes it the oldest star we know of with these dusty debris disks. Once a star gets older, about 5 million years, most of the gas that's orbiting in these disks dissipates, and dust particles either get blown away from stars or they spiral into stars. And that's one of the great mysteries.
There's some process that's replenishing the gas into this disk system. And we don't see that process going on in our planetary system. It's hard to kind of get in your head.
The mystery of what holds together the rings around 49 Ceti raises some intriguing questions. Questions conventional science can struggle to answer.
When we can't explain what we see with what we know, we have to start explaining with what we don't know.
Perhaps the most extraordinary idea for what the rings could be comes from the realm of science fiction. The concept of a giant ring-shaped world surrounding a star was first proposed by novelist Larry Niven.
Larry Niven's original ring world concept would take the material of some useless planets and use them to pound out a ribbon that surrounds a star, and this ribbon is kept inflated by centrifugal force, resulting in millions of times more useful surface area for a civilization, being able to support trillions of people. So it's a fascinating concept.
The idea of another civilization building a ring world around 49 Ceti is humbling for humanity, especially as we struggle to reach our nearest planet.
Any civilization that would be capable of making a ring world around its star would be light years ahead of us, probably tens of millions of years ahead of us in technological superiority.
But although the ring world idea is compelling, scientists must first rule out natural phenomena. For 17 years, the strange star remains unexplained, until Zuckerman comes up with a new theory that something truly extraordinary is providing the gas to make the rings.
In 2012, we attribute its existence to the collisions of an incredible number of comet-like objects. We estimated that there have to be something like 100 trillion or more comets orbiting around the star, and that the comets could be colliding, say, every 10 seconds. And that's how this gas that we discovered in 1995 is being produced.
The rate of collisions is astounding. It's hard to kind of get in your head that things could be colliding into each other that frequently.
Collisions in the storm of trillions of comets would explain the ring's apparently endless supply of dust and gas. How there could be that many comets, 400 times the mass of Earth in a single star system, remains a mystery. Up next, a shocking discovery suggests there really may be life under the Martian surface. A NASA telescope monitoring Mars discovers something that could rewrite the history of our solar system.
We have to get to the bottom of the story.
We need to investigate. We need to go back to Mars and find out.
The red planet seems to be alive.
That could be a wonder world for small living creatures underneath the Martian surface right now.
I don't think there's any good arguments that can be made that say there can't be.
Ever since NASA first began its exploration of Mars, the space agency has struggled with the question of whether there could be life on the red planet. Now, it just might have an answer. On the summit of Mauna Kea in Hawaii, NASA's powerful infrared telescope zooms in on Earth's nearest neighbor. In March of 2003, the data starts showing something strange.
It is now absolutely certain that there is methane on Mars.
It was something like 19,000 tons of methane being produced on Mars that really we couldn't explain.
The implications of this discovery stun astronomers.
The very presence of methane on Mars is really extraordinary.
One of the very exciting things about finding methane on Mars is that it's an indicator of biological activity.
It might be a signal that there are living things. And living things on another world would be, of course, one of the most dramatic findings in the history of science.
NASA scientists launch a long-term investigation into the source of the weird phenomenon. They must first determine if the clouds of gas are simply a relic from Mars' geological past.
Methane has a very short lifetime in the Martian atmosphere. Mars is a very oxidizing place, and that kind of burns the methane up.
For it to even be there in any detectable amount means that there has to be a source for it. It has to be replenished. Where would this methane come from?
Investigators struggling to answer this question turn to our own planet for clues.
On Earth, there's a few ways of making methane. So volcanoes, for example, make methane.
There once were great volcanoes on Mars, but we have no evidence whatsoever that there are any active volcanoes on Mars today.
So the recent discovery of methane on Mars is unlikely to have come from any volcanic activity.
The absence of volcanic activity on Mars forces scientists to consider a startling possibility.
On Earth, most methane is produced by living organisms.
For example, cows produce vast amounts of methane as part of their life cycle, as part of their metabolism.
What if methane in the Martian atmosphere was telling us that today on Mars, there were life forms alive somewhere producing it?
Since NASA first detected methane, mankind has dispatched 10 missions to explore the atmosphere and surface of Mars. So far, none have discovered definitive proof of life. But maybe we've been looking in the wrong place.
The idea that there's methane on Mars where we really wouldn't expect it to be found is maybe a hint that perhaps there could be a source that's associated with life, maybe in the subsurface.
I think if there is life on Mars, it's likely deep underground. And I don't think there's any good arguments that can be made that say there can't be right now.
The concept of a subterranean Martian world full of living organisms sounds like something from a sci-fi film. But the idea is based on established scientific fact.
Over 80% of Earth life is actually living underneath the surface of the Earth. And so the fact that we don't find life at the surface of Mars today doesn't really tell you much about the possibilities of life underneath. There could be a wonder world for small living creatures underneath the Martian surface right now.
Sometime in the next 3 years, the European and Russian space agencies plan to send a rover to the Red Planet to explore the 3 key areas where life could exist. Until then, the source of the methane on Mars will remain a mystery.
We need to investigate. We need to go back to Mars and find out.
We have to get to the bottom of the story. Methane is right now the hottest lead that we have for life on Mars.
Coming up, NASA's spacecraft are under attack.
It's violent, and we don't understand it. If you're not scared, you should be.
A mysterious energy is attacking NASA craft in Earth's orbit.
It's violent. We don't understand it.
You can suffer acute damage, which can lead to death.
Could this force provide clues to one of the most tragic aviation accidents in history?
Something must have happened, something unique to cause the flight to fall out of the air.
You're not scared. You should be.
Half a century of space exploration has uncovered threats which even NASA's greatest minds struggle to comprehend.
There are some incredibly destructive forces in this universe. Catastrophic events are happening around the galaxy every day.
But incredibly, one of the most dangerous places for human spacecraft is right on Earth's doorstep.
This area has become known as the South Atlantic Anomaly, and it's a pretty big area. It's about the size of half of South America.
It's known to cause anomalies in spacecraft, in shuttles. In fact, it'll crash personal computers.
We're just coming up that telescope.
You don't conduct a spacewalk when you're passing over that South Atlantic anomaly. You just don't do it.
You could call it the Bermuda Triangle of space.
One theory for the anomaly's weird effects is that they could be caused by space radiation.
In the 1950s, James Van Allen came up with what at the time was a crazy idea, that the Earth was actually surrounded by energetic radiation belts. He was right. And in fact, those belts were named after him.
The Earth's magnetic field keeps the powerful radiation of the Van Allen belts thousands of miles away from the planet's surface. But for some reason, there are dents in the force field which allow destructive energy to get dangerously close to the ground.
The Earth's magnetic field isn't symmetric, and because of that, there are places in the Earth's surface where the magnetic field is a little weaker. In those regions, the Van Allen belts come much closer to the Earth's surface.
In the region of space above the ocean 200 miles east of Brazil, the storm of charged particles becomes a very real threat.
Anything moving through that region of space is bombarded by high-energy particles, hitting at a rate of 6,000 particles per square inch per second. That's huge.
You don't really want to fly inside the radiation belts because you could suffer acute radiation damage, which can lead to death.
The potentially deadly effects of the South Atlantic anomaly on orbiting NASA craft are well documented. But recently, a theory has emerged, which suggests the reach of the anomaly's destructive power could be far greater than anyone had imagined.
Could an aircraft flying directly underneath the South Atlantic anomaly have its vital instrumentation knocked out?
Radiation can damage critical aircraft computer systems. The problem with this theory is that even above the anomaly, the closest the radiation belts come to Earth is around 125 miles.
Airliners fly at around 38 to 40,000 feet. At that altitude, they are still very far away from the Van Allen radiation belt.
For the anomaly to have any effect on commercial aircraft, there would have to be something to bridge the distance up to space. One idea is vast streaks of mega lightning.
There's a possibility there could be some kind of cascading effect from the upper atmosphere that comes down and could possibly interact with electronics.
Meteorologist Justin Burke is investigating whether such a phenomenon could have played a part in the tragic loss of Air France Flight 447 in 2009.
I thought to myself, this area, this South Atlantic anomaly, was pretty darn close to where the Air France flight pattern was.
Flight 447 leaves Rio de Janeiro at 10:29 p.m. local time on May 31st. Minutes before the plane disappears, it flies into a tropical storm above the Atlantic Ocean.
A spokesperson from Air France said that the flight was likely impacted by lightning. Since planes are designed to get hit by lightning, something else must have happened. Something special, something unique to cause the electrical system possibly to fail and the flight to fall out of the air.
Black box data recovered from the wreckage reveals that turbulence forced the pilots to climb up thousands of feet toward the dense field of radiation. If mega lightning channeled charged particles from the radiation belts into the plane's fuselage, it could have serious effects on instrumentation.
You have a tropical-based thunderstorm that itself is charged with a lot of electricity. Then you add in a South Atlantic anomaly that has been documented to have highly charged particles. It's possible that the two linked up with that one moment in time, that rarity of a connection that supercharged that storm to send higher voltage that just overloaded the circuits on the plane.
Burke's theory that Flight 447 was overwhelmed by strange atmospheric phenomena is supported by records of a conversation between the pilots.
1 hour and 51 minutes into the flight, the pilot and co-pilot can be heard on the black box discussing St. Elmo's fire, which is a static discharge that's crawling all over the plane.
The black box recordings stop at 2:14 a.m. An official investigation concludes that the crash is caused by a combination of pilot error and instrument failure. But for Burke, the influence of the South Atlantic anomaly on the disaster is impossible to ignore.
It seems to me it's a very plausible explanation for why this aircraft got taken out of the sky.
Still to come, could an unidentified vapor trail pose a deadly threat to the International Space Station?
An absolutely unexpected phenomenon.
Whatever it is, it's traveling at incredible speed.
An astronaut on board the International Space Station spots an eerie vapor trail emanating from Earth.
He notices out of the corner of his eye a flash of light.
An absolutely unexpected phenomenon.
Whatever it is, it's traveling at incredible speed.
As Mission Control struggles to identify the threat, witnesses on the ground report an explosion high in Earth's atmosphere.
On a space station, any significant impact would just be devastating.
October 10th, 2013. Astronaut Luca Parmitano uses a rare moment of downtime to photograph Earth's greatest light show.
An astronaut is sitting in the cupola, the viewport of the space station, getting ready to take pictures of the northern lights.
The ISS is traveling at about 17,500 miles per hour. It sees a sunset or a sunrise every 45 minutes. The views for the astronauts are stunning.
But Parmitano's sightseeing doesn't last long.
He notices out of the corner of his eye a flash of light.
Off to the west, he suddenly sees an absolutely unexpected phenomenon.
Whatever it is, it's traveling at incredible speed. It's already high in the Earth's atmosphere, and it looks as if it's come from the Earth.
The object's velocity and trajectory make it look like a potential threat. The trail starts to disappear in the fading evening light, but as the astronauts stare at it, they see something else strange.
They observe a mysterious cloud, an expanding cloud on the horizon that appears to be getting closer.
The image the astronauts capture is unlike anything ever seen from the ISS.
It's a spooky image. Something emanates from Earth, creates a massive hollow cloud. It's the classic signature of a spacecraft, and yet there is no spacecraft. There's no explanation for what this thing is.
Mission Control cannot see the photos in real time, so they're unable to make any assessment of what the crew is seeing.
Within a short period of time, the crew reports down to Mission Control at NASA what they've seen. NASA doesn't know what this is.
The crew's in this weird situation. They've definitely seen something, but Houston's denying there's anything there.
There's no record of a launch, and so your next question has to be, what else could it be?
As the astronauts struggle to identify the sighting, reports emerge from Russia of a mysterious object moving across the skies. Videos of the event immediately begin to circulate online.
Interestingly enough, there were folks in Russia who were reporting seeing the exact same thing as the astronauts at the exact same time.
In northern Kazakhstan, in the Ural area of Russia, thousands of people are now photographing it with their video cameras, their dash cams, and filing it on YouTube within a few hours, calling it a UFO.
Initially, NASA doesn't link the footage from the ground with the bizarre events witnessed from the ISS. But just as it seems as if the sighting will remain unexplained, the Russian military makes a startling disclosure.
In Moscow, officials announced the test flight of a military missile. In this case, however, this notice apparently never got to NASA's attention.
Generally, the Russians do put out information about missile tests that they're performing. Anything launched into space, well, you want to know what it is and where it's going, because you need to track those things to be able to protect the ISS.
The missile launch becomes the official explanation for the sighting. Mission Control veteran Jim Oberg believes that the eerie shape of the cloud can be explained by a discarded rocket stage, casting a shadow in the center of the missile's exhaust plume.
What's so intriguing about this experience is that it's totally unexpected. That cloud that they took almost 100 pictures of is an extraordinary sight in space, extremely rare type of Russian missile test. And just purely by chance, the rocket is silhouetted against the setting sun.
As long as the veil of secrecy surrounding Russian missile tests persists, it will be hard to know for certain what effects they may produce, or whether they are just a smokescreen for deeper secrets. Up next, a mysterious deep space signal appears to be coming from a newly discovered habitable world.
I said, wow, this is fantastic. Is this E.T.?
You actually dare to think, did we find it? Did we find extraterrestrial life?
While searching space for signals from other worlds, an astronomer spots something extraordinary.
I said, wow, this is fantastic. Is this E.T.?
Question is someone firing that laser pulse at us?
You actually dare to think, did we find it? Did we find extraterrestrial life?
Some of NASA's finest scientists have grappled with the fundamental question of whether we are alone in the universe. But realistically, if we do ever receive an answer, we may struggle to recognize it. Sydney, Australia, December 2008. Astrophysicist Dr. Ragbir Bethal is getting ready for his regular search of the southern skies.
Whenever there's a nice clear night, we go down to the observatory. We have a list of objects and we just hop from one object to the other until quite late in the night.
Like many skywatchers, Dr. Bethal is hoping for a signal from another world. But unlike many of his peers, he doesn't focus on radio signals.
40 years have passed by and nothing had been discovered. So a number of us thought, well, it's time we moved into another spectrum.
Advanced civilizations could have a range of communication techniques available to them.
We are an emerging civilization. We've only had radio 100 years in our 5 billion year history. Some stars are 10 billion years old. Our star is 5 billion years old. So you can imagine civilizations billions of years ahead of us.
Perhaps a more likely communication method would be laser signaling.
If we have developed lasers, it's likely that another civilization has developed laser systems. We know that we can encode lasers with signal and have it deciphered at the other end. So why can't an alien civilization do the same thing and try and communicate with others?
In December 2008, Dr. Bethal is 8 years into his search for laser signals of extraterrestrial origin.
We did this normal run. I went into the observatory, checked the equipment, made sure I aligned the telescope, and then I started my search.
He uses an optical telescope to search the Tucanae star cluster 16,000 light years from Earth. When he looks at the data, he sees something extraordinary.
I found this spike on the screen, and that was exciting. We went back and checked that our instruments were not malfunctioning, and the equipment passed it. There was nothing wrong with the equipment. I said, "Wow, this is fantastic! Have I seen this? Is this ET?"
Bethal's find is exceptional, but then a strange series of events starts to make it look like a defining moment in history. In September 2010, a team of astronomers discovers a planet in the habitable zone of the star, Gliese 581. And reports on several websites claim that the new planet is the point of origin for Dr. Bethal's mysterious laser signal.
This is something beyond our wildest dreams.
We know that almost all stars have planets going around them. And some of those planets, actually a lot of these planets, are planets that are kind of nice planets. We call them Goldilocks planets, not too hot, not too cold, not too far away from their sun. And some of them have liquid water and the right conditions for life.
For a moment, it seems as if the data could finally provide an answer to the question of whether we are alone in the universe.
In 2010, there was announced a discovery of a planet called Gliese 581G, which means that it was, the fifth planet around this star Gliese 581. And it looked like it was the first one that was detected that might be habitable. In fact, some of the discoverers said 100% sure that it has life.
If we have an intelligent signal tied to an exoplanet, you actually dare to think, did we find it? Did we find extraterrestrial life?
But while it does initially look like Gliese 581G could actually be the first habitable planet found outside our solar system, the reports suggesting it could be the source of the Tucanae laser beam turn out to be wrong. And there is another major problem with the potentially life-changing discovery.
A lot of planet hunters were somewhat skeptical that they had actually had the signal for this planet being there, and actually recent work in the past couple of months has shown without doubt that Gliese 581G doesn't actually exist, that it was an artifact of the data reduction that was used.
With no planet near the point of origin, the mysterious laser pulse must have some other source. All attempts to find it a second time for verification have been unsuccessful.
Physics is a very hard discipline, and you need to have, in this case, extraordinary evidence, and the extraordinary evidence wasn't there. Yes, we're still searching for it, and we'll continue to search for it.
While future investigations may still prove that this signal was a false lead, the search for first contact continues. Still to come, is there an unknown force in the galactic core capable of moving entire stars?
Something weird is happening in the middle of our Milky Way.
In a distant region of space close to the galactic core, the stars are forming into strange patterns.
You see stars that should be completely independent, pointing in the same direction. And that's not easily explained.
Something weird is happening in the middle of our Milky Way.
But the cause of the phenomenon is unknown to science.
There is no force that connects different stars in different places of the Milky Way together. The stars do not know about each other.
In 2009, astrophysicist Albert Zylstra begins his research with the Hubble telescope, looking for planetary nebulae located near the center of our galaxy.
A planetary nebula is mass that the star has ejected at the end of its life into space. The Sun will lose about 50% of its total mass and just eject it out. And it is that majority of material that is a planetary nebula. And we know about 2,000 of these nebulae in the Milky Way. The shapes are absolutely amazing. The colors are amazing. Some are oval. A few are even round. Nebulae can be butterfly shapes. They are the most beautiful things that we find in astronomy.
But Zylstra isn't interested in the beauty of the astronomical phenomena. He's investigating reports of a disturbing anomaly close to the center of our galaxy.
What drew our attention was a claim by another researcher from Argentina that there was an alignment between unrelated planetary nebulae.
Nebulae shouldn't be pointing in a uniform direction. It goes against everything scientists know about how they form.
The galaxy is very flat and is seen from the position of the Sun. You see it as a plane on the sky, the Milky Way. The stars in the Milky Way all have their axes rotation pointing in a random direction.
But however improbable the phenomenon of nebulae forming into patterns might be, Zylstra can't ignore the evidence in front of him.
Nebulae are pointing within the plane of the galaxy. And that is something that we don't understand.
What makes the phenomenon even stranger is that it seems to be only one type of nebula forming into patterns.
We find that the butterfly nebulae show this alignment, but the oval nebulae do not. So it differs from type of nebula to type of nebula.
Whatever the force is responsible for the phenomenon, some nebulae seem to be immune.
While one type of nebula would know about the galaxy, another type of nebula would not, is a mystery. If you see different stars pointing in the same direction, you may assume that there is a force that connects them. No such force is known.
When you see order or patterns, it's natural to think about what could be creating that order.
Scientists can only speculate about what is producing such order.
There is a magnetic field pervading the entire galaxy. It's 100,000 times weaker than the magnetic field on Earth. Far too weak to have any effect on stars or nebulae.
But while the galactic magnetic field is too weak today to have any effect on stars, it may not always have been.
It is possible that when the galaxy was still young, and now we're talking about 5 to 10 billion years ago, the magnetic field was stronger than it is nowadays. Strong enough to have an effect on the process by which stars form.
If there was this galactic magnetic field that caused this, the question is, what caused the magnetic field?
Until the realities of the galactic magnetic field are better understood, the strange alignment of the Butterfly Nebulae will remain a mystery. Even as NASA leads us into the future, every mission is built upon the achievements of the past. And new discoveries force us to rethink our understanding of the cosmos. As we explore ever deeper into space, only one thing is certain: we will be astonished.